Hello everyone. I would like to switch our attention to our next presenter, Katie Lawson. Katie Lawson is a marine zoologist with the New York Natural Heritage Program and works closely with the New York State DEC Division of Marine Resources in Kings Park. Katie tracks and monitors all invasive species in the state, and previously, Katie studied invasive species at Smithsonian Environmental Research Center and monitors invasions in all major ports across the country. Please welcome Katie Lawson.
Thank you, Sandra, and everybody at LIISMA for inviting me to talk. I know it might be a little different from most of what we've heard today, but here in Long Island, we have really kind of the great honor of being one of the only prisms in this, well, the only prism in the state to have a marine invasive species part of our work. And so it's really important and exciting to get to share knowledge between some of the more terrestrial freshwater aquatic scientists into the marine realm, because sometimes we marine zoologists can feel like we're alone out to sea, but there's a whole field of professionals working in invasive species science that we can collaborate with and learn from. And so I really appreciate hearing from all of you today. So what I'm going to present today is mostly just a kind of broad introduction to marine invasive species. Some of you may be already familiar with the vectors and methods of spread for marine and aquatic invasive species, but in case you're not, some of them are kind of based in oceanography and biology of marine animals that might be a little bit different to what you're used to. So hopefully this is a great introduction if you've never heard it, or a good reminder if you've already heard it before. Great. So like Sandra said, I have a background in doing marine invasive species work at the Smithsonian. There, we were responsible for tracking marine invasive species around the country at major ports, including doing things like diving under giant container vessels, which is extremely terrifying and dark, very dark. But we also did biofouling surveys, which is mostly what I'll be talking about today, and do trial marine eradication efforts, which are much harder than managing things on land. We don't have a firm grasp of the best ways of managing underwater, and so lots to learn in that sphere. And I've also done some work on outreach and mitten crabs, and so if you have any questions about marine invasive species, I have a broad depth of knowledge here. Thanks to Rich for giving really the greatest introduction into what the New York Natural Heritage Program actually does, which is mostly what I do for my work as a marine zoologist, is track rare and endangered species in the ocean, including our species of sea turtles that visit Long Island, the whales and other cetaceans that come and visit over the course of the summer, and then some of the other more threatened and endangered species like lined seahorses that we find out in our New York Bight. But I do want to take one umbrage with what Rich said. We actually do have two offices of the New York Natural Heritage Program, one in Albany and one here on Long Island in Kings Park, where our two marine zoologists work. So if you have any questions about marine issues locally, we are stationed near Stony Brook in Kings Park. So we are stationed in the Marine Resources Office of the New York DEC. We work very closely with them, and I do a lot of work particularly with DEC as their marine invasive species liaison and coordinator for the state. So I'm going to talk more from a marine invasive species perspective than I am from a rare species perspective today, and hopefully that's useful for you guys. So we are a part of LIISMA. Of course, we attend all the meetings DEC staff does, including Steve and Kathy, who have been doing aquatic research with LIISMA and the whole state of prisms for a number of years. We also attend the LIIMACE meetings, which is the Long Island Metro Aquatic Invasive Species Panel. And if anybody is interested in learning more about marine issues or aquatic issues in invasive species management, join the LIIMACE meetings. This is the plug to come and hear more specifically about aquatic animals. And then I also sit on the New York Aquatic Nuisance Species Panel, which is our regional. Several states meet together and get together to discuss and compare notes on marine and aquatic invasive species issues along the Northeast corridor. So New York, Connecticut, Delaware, all of the kind of nearby states. And then here, just as a snippet, some of our favorite marine species and some with kind of upcoming issues. One of the major things we work on is crab management. including 2 species of crabs that are preferred use as bait for some of our fishermen here on Long Island. So this is the invasive green crab and the Asian shore crab. Right now, the green crab is allowed to be used as bait. It's been here for over 100 years. But the shore crab is not. And we're considering ways to kind of incorporate its usage into the bait industry without perpetuating the spread of that species, trying to balance kind of socioeconomic desires of our community with the kind of threats proposed by the crabs. So if you have comments or want to talk about bait crab issues, I'd love to hear them. Some of our recent updates for marine invasive species issues with both with LIIMAs and at DEC is that we have updated the new tiered marine list. So previously we only had a handful of marine species on our statewide list of ranked tiered importance of different species. We have added over 30 species to that list, all marine invasive species. So if you want to learn more about what species are in New York, which ones are coming to New York, which ones we're really worried about seeing, you can go on our Heritage website, find this tier list for Long Island and the whole state, and learn about marine invasive species. We also added more species to our website, IMAP Invasives, which I know a lot of you know. So if you want to log entries for any of these species, you can now go and find more species on IMAP to log sightings of. With Abby and the whole LIISMA LIIMAs team, we published a white paper, which is an introduction to marine invasive species you can read on the website. If you don't know anything, it's a really great starting point to learn what's threatening New York and where we need to go in the future. And then upcoming, I will be at the expo. Everybody go to the expo. Your final plug, please come see us all at the expo. It'll be a great opportunity to talk to us one-on-one and hear more details about some of the things we've covered today. I will be bringing live specimens to the expo. So if you want to touch them, see them under a microscope, wave your finger at them, they will be there, and I'll do some kind of introductory how to identify a marine invasive invertebrate species. So here, our first introductory topic, we're going to talk about vectors and spread of marine species. The main 2 ways that invasive species come to the United States from other regions on the globe is through international shipping. So there's a part of shipping called ballast water. Raise your hand if you've heard of ballast water. Okay, pretty good spread in the room, which is great. In a large container vessel, the ships that bring all of our goods to the country from other places, there's this is a little blurry, I'm sorry, but there's a cargo hold that is balanced by the intake of gallons and gallons of water to keep the ship stable in the water so that it's not kind of tipping and bottom heavy or top heavy, make sure it's stable in the water. That water that they intake into the ballast tanks is transported sometimes from one location, say Japan, to something like San Francisco. And the water that was intaken in Japan is released as the cargo is offloaded to continue to balance the vessel into the waters of San Francisco. And if the coastal waters in Japan are anything like the coastal waters in San Francisco, which they are, those species that may be taken in with the water, the floating phytoplankton, zooplankton, very small microscopic organisms, can survive the voyage and be released into the bays of San Francisco or similar. So that has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. We've been sailing tall ships for a really long time and transporting species unknowingly in ballast tanks. Before we really knew about plankton, we knew about filtering and all of the species that can move without us really knowing it in the bottoms of ships. So a lot of species like the green crab that's been here for 100 years was actually transported in ballast water many years ago by some of the original vessels that were coming to the eastern seaboard, coast, whatever. The other way that marine invasive species travel on ships is through what is called biofouling. And same species that can live as plankton in the ballast water tanks, after they've had their planktonic phase where they float in the water column, they usually settle and attach to the surface of rocks usually, or whatever the seafloor is made of, and live there permanently. So something like a barnacle or a mussel, you can imagine, kind of secures itself in its spot and for its adult life lives there for the rest of its time. And it becomes what we call fouling species. If you have a boat, you know about fouling species because you have to scrape it off the bottom of your boat every so often. And those mussels and barnacles can live on docks, on piers, and on the bottom of your boat. And when you move your boat, the species that are living on the bottom of your boat move with you, and they can start the cycle all over again by reproducing in the new place. So we worry about international vessels bringing biofouling on the hulls of their ships, but really those ships care a lot about losing money from gas. So anything that is causing drag on the hull of their ship that's pulling and slowing them down in the water, they're going to want to scrape off and clean off so they save money on fuel. But in local harbors, on recreational boats that sometimes sit in our harbors for a really long time and then move far away, those can move them coastwise. So maybe moving them from New Jersey into New York, and then New York into Connecticut, Connecticut into Rhode Island. And they have this coastwise hop spread where they can really spread things that way. Those are the two main ways that invasive species move and come to the United States. There's also intentional purchase and import of species for food, for seafood, for aquarium, for pets. The lionfish, which is one of the most famous marine invasive species, was actually thought to have been accidentally released from an aquarium tank in someone's home. Unfortunately, it was a hurricane that actually probably released the species from someone's home aquarium tank into the coast. And that has created a lot of problems in Florida and the Caribbean. One of the most voracious predators in the ocean, the lionfish, really does a number on reef fish in southern United States. And so we really are doing a lot of work to discourage the intentional import or unintentional release of species that could become invasive, right? A lot of times when pet releases happen, it's with really good intentions, but you don't know what species will survive and then become invasive. And in the same way that we have that with things like boa constrictors, in the terrestrial realm, we have that for fish and lots of invasive seaweeds and algae as well. So one of the other potential vectors in terms of coastal spread could be aquaculture. On the coast of Alaska, there have been spreads of invasive species that were on cages that they moved to a new aquaculture site. So they expanded their production into a new location, drug their cages to the new site on a barge, and unfortunately released things that were on their cages there. But really, when we're maintaining our cages, keeping them clean, keeping our boats clean, we can prevent a lot of that spread. So here's what some of that biofouling can look like. This is definitely one of the worst cases I've ever seen. Most boat owners would not want that to be their ship, because what you're going to have to do is scrape it all off and repaint your vessel, which is incredibly expensive and very difficult to do. So boat owners, especially on the West Coast, spend a lot of time in maintaining their paint structure on their boat, making sure it's not chipped, making sure it's updated a lot of the time. And so they don't ever get to this level. But there are abandoned vessels that end up sitting in the water for years and years at a time, especially in places where the marinas don't freeze and they don't take out their docks in the winter. And that you can see this level of fouling on something that's been abandoned. Here on the East Coast, where most of our docks are removed in the winter and most people dry dock their vessel, so they take it out in the winter and keep it dry, we luckily don't get to this level of fouling. But in the course of one summer, like all annual plants, this community of organisms can grow really, really fast and get to a high level of abundance by the end of the year. So all of these species tend to have planktonic larval phases where they float in the water column, settle on the hard surface of your dock or your boat, and then live there for the rest of their lives. The original vector could be ballast, could be hull fouling, but once they get to the new location, they spread on smaller vessels. And keeping that paint coating and anti-fouling coating can really help prevent the spread of species this way. So some of the major species I've already mentioned, barnacles and mussels. There's also several anemone-like species like hydroids, animals called tunicates or bryozoans, which are colonial species that live on the bottom of most docks. On the bottom of this picture here, you can see a bryozoan or a tunicate, colonial tunicates. And these is a type of species we call fouling. They're also marine invertebrates for the most part. They are animals, despite looking a little bit like plants. However, they do reproduce similar to the plants. They broadcast spawn. They have asexual reproduction where they can split and form new colonies. One of the emerging issues of spread of invasive species in the ocean is a problem with marine debris. So you might have heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is a giant island in the Pacific Ocean where trash has been accumulating due to the spinning gyre of the Pacific Ocean. And all of that newfound hard surfaces living in the ocean is like creating a new island, right? It's new habitat and area for these organisms to settle and live perpetually. So once they attach to something like a floating can or a floating tire, if that piece of trash then dislodges from the island, it can be moved along with the currents and the gyre to other places. So when I was working for the Smithsonian, we had a big problem with the tsunami debris from the tsunami in Japan in 2011, where whole docks and marinas and piers and like an entire fish well in a person's boat were washing up on the shores of California because they were dislodged in Japan during the terrible tsunami. And so something like this was a fish well that had Japanese writing on it, and we could identify the original seller of the fish that this came from in Japan, had several live species attached to the outside of the fish well, and then several species of fish that were actually inside of the well and surviving that were from coastal Japan. And so this washed up in California with several potentially invasive species that if it had been left on the shoreline could have spread to other places. There's also a problem, especially in Long Island Sound, with ghost gear. So this is fishing gear that is lost or cut from fishing vessels that is unfortunately abandoned because it's so hard to find it on the seafloor and collect it from the seafloor. And so these hard surface cages collect settled biofouling in this brand new habitat that they don't normally have, and they create these pathways or islands for invasive species to spread. And some of these have been dug up in a new project to try to clean the Long Island Sound from ghost gear, and they found many, many tunicates and bryozoans, but also species like very small shrimp that have found like this whole new reef that they love to live in. There are lots of hiding places and crevices to hide from predators, but they're mostly invasive shrimp. That would be a problem in the coast as well. So what are the impacts? Now that we know that marine invasive species can get here and spread, why does that matter in the ocean? One of the main impacts of biofouling, besides dragging your vessel and kind of causing a problem for boat owners, is that they can smother other species. So one of the major problems here on the East Coast is a tunicate called Didymnum vexillum. It's a colonial mat-like tunicate. You can imagine just a big like carpet of slimy, tough, rubbery, flat tunicate mats that can actually cover the breathing holes and tubes that do oxygen exchange for things like mussels and scallops. So in the Georges Bank off of Massachusetts, this killed acres and acres of scallop beds that were once very productive and abundant for Massachusetts scallop collectors. And we have that here on Long Island as well, smothering mussel beds, native mussel reefs, and things like that. One of the other things it is basically just a nuisance species. I don't know if any of you have ever pulled up an anchor or something, but when you pull up a line that is coated in mussels and coated in tunicates, not only is it hard to pull up because now it's slimy and gross and cutting your hands, it weighs a lot. All of these tunicates are filled with water. They're little airbag balloons, and it just makes it a lot harder to do your job as a fisherman to pull up a cage or anything covered with this kind of biofouling. So this is Stiella clava. This is another species we do have here on the East Coast and on Long Island, and this is that Didymnum vexillum. There are ecological impacts, of course. Several of the non-native crabs that we have here on Long Island are voracious predators, eat a lot of the other species that are found in the rocky intertidal. But something kind of unexpected that we didn't know about was the Chinese mitten crab, which is now up and down the Hudson. Unfortunately, you can find it as far north as Albany. So what was once a marine invasive species is now their problem up in Albany. But we're trying to control it. This is a species that is commonly imported on purpose, unfortunately live for seafood. And so we're doing a lot of work and outreach to try to prevent that intentional import by different cultures that are used to it as being a normal food source. Because it can create these mud burrows on the shores of things like Hudson River, other tributaries, which actually degrade the shoreline by creating crevices and withdrawing all the sediment such that riverbeds collapse and unfortunately, you lose a lot of land this way. So this is from San Francisco, and we haven't seen impacts like this yet in the Hudson River, but it only has really just started becoming incredibly abundant up the Hudson River, and we hope to prevent its spread and abundance levels before it gets to this kind of impacts. So our main tool in marine invasive species work is prevention. Like I was saying, eradication and management in the marine realm is still a really new field. It is extremely hard to eradicate anything from the ocean, mostly because all habitats in the marine realm are really connected. And many of these species are both microscopic in the plankton, in the water column, and asexually reproducing. So like many plants, you have to kill all of it in order for it to not continue to survive. And that's just very hard because if even a single zooid survives, it can reproduce and grow back. But one of the main things we do is management to prevent the spread, to prevent the vectors. And so we do have international regulations on ballast water. And now ballast water must be treated as it's going from port to port to prevent the survival of all the organisms that are living inside of that water tank. There are also beginning to be international standards for biofouling. So how clean your vessel must be, logs that you've cleaned your vessel, what paints you're using, what anti-fouling coatings you're using, and how often they're being applied. And states like California have introduced statewide recreational vessel rules as well, so that you have to maintain a log and knowledge about how often you clean your vessel. So that one picture of a vessel that was abandoned with tons of biofouling doesn't happen anymore in states like California, where they might actually leave their vessel in the water all the time. We also have the statewide, of course, prohibited and regulated species list, where we do have bans on the intentional importation of species like Chinese mitten crab that we're increasingly trying to give outreach about and prevent the intentional import for pets or aquarium trade, some of the worst offenders in marine invasive species. We have also started working with other states to create whole fouling recommendations so that recreational boat users can know the best practices to keep their boat clean to prevent biofouling spread. Here on the East Coast, that really is store dry, right? Take it out in the winter, get it cleaned professionally by your marina, make sure you're taking it out once a year so that everything that was on your hull dies. And that's kind of like the best prevention tool we have in the marine realm. But there's also things like specialized paints and foul release coatings to prevent the settlement of these species from the start. We, of course, also have outreach efforts where we tell people about the impacts of invasive species, how to clean your boats, and then also about live importation, purchasing species at live markets, and spreading that awareness and knowledge that some species really shouldn't be released in our natural environment. I also went to the boat stewards training here on Long Island earlier this year and talked to the boat stewards who were going out to Heckscher State Park, which has one of the only marine DEC launches, to talk to the public about how to keep their marine going vessels clean and without biofouling. And then expanding bait disposal stations. So just like in the aquatic realm, disposing of your bait, your worms, your crabs that you're using to catch other fish, don't just throw them into the ocean when you're done, because those are living animals as well. Those could still become a problem. You should really be using specified bait disposal stations to make sure that none of those species are released. And of course, we have IMAP invasives, where we're tracking the spread of invasive species here in the state and participating in regional efforts, because the ocean is not only on Long Island, it's of course in New Jersey, it's in Connecticut, and really making sure we have a regional view of what's happening and what might be coming. So some of the outreach is available, of course, on the New York Invasive Species website, NYIS info. And you can find some of the same materials that we use for the aquatic realm. You can talk to outreach and volunteers about doing it in the marine realm. So something like not releasing your pets, water gardening, all of the stuff that is written for the aquatic freshwater realm can be applied in the marine realm as well. And we're working to expand some of those documents for more specific targeted saltwater recommendations for things that might matter more in the marine than the freshwater realm. I also have some pictures of marine invasive species, just to give you kind of a glimpse of what we're talking about and what some of the, if you've never seen a tunicate up close. So here we have Didymnum vexillum, that is the colonial Ascidian tunicate. So these are colonies of attached zooids that are each individual clones of one larger colony. Same for Botuloides violaceus on the top left there. These are soft-bodied, very squishy, flat mats of organisms that can smother other things. And then we have Stiella clava, which is a solitary tunicate. So if you can imagine, that shape is each one of these little tiny dots. So these are related species, but this one lives solitary, not in a clone. This one lives in a clonal colony. Then we have Didymene lineata, which is a sea anemone, which actually has the special ability to raft attached to the water surface. So it can flip itself upside down, attached to like the meniscus layer of the top of the water column, and float upside down to a new location. Very hard to prevent the spread of that species. Another two anemone species, this one just very recently in 2023 was identified in New York from iNaturalist sightings. Local scientists hadn't spotted it until they went on iNaturalist and said, what the heck is that? That's not anything we have here. And then Aptasia guiton up on the top left is the pink spotted anemone. These are all both invasive new invaders to this area. A new marine tube worm, Phycopomatus enigmaticus. This is a species that can create its own reefs. So similar to how a coral reef might create a lot of structure underwater, or an oyster reef creates its own oyster bed, they can create worm reefs. They make calcareous tubes that can become large structures and become incredibly problematic species that way. And then this is an encrusting bryozoan species, which is another colonial tree-like, fan-like species that is also very recently seen in New York. So if you want to learn more about these species, we have the Marine Invader ID guides, which are available for download from the LIISMA website. Happy to talk about any of them. And again, if you want to look up any of the new invasive species on the tiers list on the Heritage website, please do. Familiarize yourself with these species and tell people about the problems here on Long Island. With that, I will take your questions. Well, it's a great question. So, of course, you know, there's statewide invasive species collection permits, yes, and mitten crabs are actually prohibited. So they're one of the species that really, if you find it and see it, you should dispose of it immediately, because it is not legal to transport, not legal to kind of have possession of. And, you know, we are mostly invasive professionals. We understand this problem with promoting eating that species. It is intentionally imported by people who want to eat it. It's very good. People like it a lot. So promoting eating it would almost inevitably promote importing it, unfortunately, because it creates a market of people who find it, you know, interesting, delicious. And so we really don't want to promote people eating it, even if it was found naturally, just because it might eventually lead to more importation. Because it's way easier to import it online than it is to go out and find one.
Or maybe it's fish or some kind of carp or something, and there's a contest for collecting it. Get posted.
Yes.
So is that, it is accessible?
It's a really great question, and I will debate this with you guys forever, because there's so many different possible reasons why that's a good idea or a bad idea. So for the lionfish, which is, I think, one of the main things that we do derbies for, where we pay people to collect them and eat them, and we have whole cookbooks saying, this is how you should fry it up. It's delicious, please eat it. With the lionfish, we're really trying to lower the levels of the population. It's not an actual eradication effort, because it will never happen. The levels of the lionfish are so insanely big that you can't control it even by employing the whole state of Florida to go out and spearfish for it. It's also, you know, venomous, so it's bad news to do that. But for something like like the bait crab issue that we're talking about here on Long Island, there really is a viable kind of industry that could be created from that. And so, you know, our fishermen want it. We're really talking to them about the potential impacts of that. But will it actually reduce the population of those crabs? No. So if we want the industry and we think the industry can be prevented from causing spread, you know, that's one question we can talk about. Are they successful eradication efforts for those species in the marine system? No, they're not. Yeah. Yes.
David Grigg asked, this summer we have seen a marked increase in jellyfish in the coves around Mauritius Bay. What is contributing to this?
Yeah, so it totally depends what species of jellyfish it is. Lots of jellyfish do boom bust cycles, and some years if the waters are warmer or they have more delicious food to be eaten, we'll get jellyfish booms. But there are invasive species of jellyfish from Barnegat Bay in New Jersey that we are watching. So if you have photos of the jellyfish and you want to send them to me, I would love to see that. But most likely it's probably going to be one of those boom bust cycles for native or at least common jellyfish. Yes, I mean, totally. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the most interesting current issues, because we're talking about the industry's aspect of it, blue crabs are actually invasive right now in Europe. So a crab that we on the East Coast say is a delicacy and one of our best kind of resources for fishermen, the blue crab, which in Chesapeake is, you know, the most famous crab, is invasive in, I believe, in France and a couple other European countries, and they're trying to eradicate it. But there's also a growing movement to say, why? You know, now we have this crab that people in the US love and want to kind of harvest. Why not keep it around and continue to harvest it in Europe as well? In terms of in Asia, off the top of my head, I can't think of one, but definitely there are things that have moved from the United States to other countries as well. International shipping goes both ways, and it really just depends on the sort of temperate zone of the ports. So anything that's in that same kind of similarity to Chesapeake, San Francisco, ends up spreading species across the world. All right. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Katie, for introducing us to this wonderful world. I love that beadlet anemone. I think it's such a cute name. I love that one. That's my favorite of our invasive species. Okay, we'll finish up and we're running a little ahead of time, so that is good. All right. So any other business, anything left over, any other topics that you thought of during this meeting, any other kind of updates to bring up? Otherwise, I'm seeing none. I will send you guys off. Thank you so much for being here today. If you have any other questions in general, you could always reach us at invasive@lisma.org. That is an email address that goes to all of us. Definitely check out our website, subscribe to our newsletter, and our next LIISMA Partners meeting will probably be in this building, December 12th. We hope to see you there. So thank you so much for joining us today.